Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another fun-filled movie Odyssey video here at live. Always coming at you from my house here in Northport. I typically do. I try to do a video every day. I look at this whole kind of thing that I do with these videos and this channel as just like a kind of like a journal. Like, you know, these are the things that really inspire me. There's a lot of things that obviously inspire me, but films probably inspire me the most. I get the most pleasure out of films. It's my favorite thing to do. I've talked about in the past, like when I have some free time or things that I have some free time and there's like things to do. Two of my favorite things that I usually always jump at the chance to participate in, if you will, is to go see a band, to go see live music, and also the other thing that is equally as exciting for me is to go to the movies. Those are my two favorite activities. I probably almost enjoy going to the movies a little bit more to some degree, but that's a hard thing to say though. But I just love that experience. And as I've gotten older, I try not to be, because sometimes when you get older, and as you get older, you have some experience. You sometimes people tend to get kind of set in their ways, or to a degree they'll get more cynical, or they'll get more have a little bit of a more narrow scope, to certain things, or they might just like a particular thing, and anything that doesn't fit outside of that, obviously over time you develop tastes, and you spend time with different genres and different things that you really love and that you gravitate towards. And I'm very much of that mindset. But for me, it's like when it comes to music and when it comes to films, I try to always. I mean, obviously, you want to. If there's a band you're wanting to see, or a movie you're wanting to see, or that you hear about, and you're not, you're not sure if you want to go check it out. There's always a thing of where you're like, well, okay, you weigh it out and you think, okay, is this going to be cool? Is this something I really want to spend my time and money, and those kinds of things. But I don't know. I always reflect to like when I was a kid, and if it was music oriented, I would just go to it. I would just go for the experience. A lot of the times it was regardless. I didn't really, it didn't really concern me as much as to like the particulars around it, like if it was a very specific style, or if it was, a full band or a trio or a solo artist. Same thing with films. I would just watch whatever was there. I would just kind of dive into it. And I've always, one good trait that I have at least is that I've always had a pretty open mind to those things and to checking out new things. Because I think it of it on two levels. Like one part, it's I look at it as like an educational thing, because films really deeply inspire me, and it's a passion, but it really inspires me, particularly around music oriented things, around my band Quantum, and in general, but especially around that project. And the same thing for music. I'm always, like when I go to a show, for instance, when I go to see a live band, whether it's a bigger show or a little local show with a full band or maybe just a singer songwriter kind of a thing, I it's the same thing for me. I wear like two hats, in those kinds of situations. First and foremost, I'm going there because it's fun and you want to be entertained. And on the other side of it, I look at it as this educational thing where there's every now and then something I'll see or hear will will really resonate with me, and it will usually unconsciously, sometimes consciously, but usually unconsciously, it will maybe stick in the back of my brain, and when I maybe go to create something or have an idea, that little thing that was etched in my head from that experience will will influence something, or I'll actually hear something from that particular experience in the work. It's kind of interesting and kind of weird, but it always is like there's always some kind of thing around that experience that sometimes really influences me and actually comes out in the music, especially if I'm writing music or creating music. It's an interesting thing. And it can be, it could be anything. It could be maybe, you know uh, around that particular experience, maybe how the vocals were being projected, or maybe the way the sound was in that particular room, or a certain tone or a certain melody that stood out, or a rhythmic idea, all those kinds of things. And the same thing happens for me with film. So I look at it, twofold. It's entertaining, and it's a fun, escapist experience, but it's also educational for me, because I never feel you stop learning. So I look at all of these tools as being helping you process and helping you articulate, maybe some future ideas. That was one thing when I went to school, when I went to Berkeley. There was an endless, amount of free access to see music. So every second I got that I had free, I would go to as much music as I possibly could. And I didn't really have any prejudice about what it was. I just wanted that experience. So, and I found that was a huge, especially at that point, but was a huge component of my education. And it just helped broaden my awareness of all of these other things that I was, previously unaware. So I always look at both of those things, film and music, like I always look at it in two different lights, and that they both serve and fulfill two different things for me. It's always been an interesting process. And I remember, like, as a kid, when it was purely like this magical experience the first time seeing music, or even the first time I saw a movie, and I found myself being transported. And obviously, as I've gotten older, you get more picky, you get more rigid as far as, well, I I don't really. It's not really my, like, say for example, around music. I'm not like a huge fan of like Americana music, or certain styles of folk music that are out. And I know, like, maybe there's a bunch of options, but say most of those options are in that genre. Whereas, like, I'm more keen to, wanting to go see, like, say, a jazz group or an electronic show, or even like a punk show or a metal show. When I was younger, I didn't really think in terms of that, in that way. I would just go and partake in that experience. And I notice as I've gotten older, I've gotten more picky and cynical about certain things. And this is just from being a fan of the arts. But I try not to. I try to. I don't know. I purposely try to look at it from an innocent perspective. Try to look at it through the eyes of a child and just go for the experience. Obviously, there are things that I want to try to hear and see, but it's that actual kind of ritualistic idea or that setting of what the music can do that I just try to go to a show without being too cynical about it. And I've seen lots of music lately. I've been going to a lot of live local music, and it's been great. And this winter was really great because I was fortunate to be involved with a lot of shows. But so I try to keep that perspective. I have some friends that are they're very particular who they'll want to see, and they're very critical of pretty much everything. And I totally get that, and I'm very much in that world, and I share their opinions pretty much 100%. But on the other side, I'm like, well, I just want that experience, so I'll just go and experience it without having any preconceived ideas. So, and that's kind of coming from when I was a kid and when I first saw somebody play a guitar, or first time I went to a movie theater, not really thinking about what it was. It's more of the experience. So I try to always think or approach it in those terms so I can just have that experience, even though I have a very, you know, particular thing. It's interesting. And I've noticed, yeah, as people get older, they probably gravitate towards more, towards that side of things more so because, you know, you spend more time, you develop a certain taste or taste in particular genres. You start being able to decipher, certain things in a genre that are better well executed than others. All those kinds of things. But so yeah, it's an interesting experience going through that as you get older. So, but today's show is going to be centered on, I think, one of the greatest action movies ever made. This is a movie that's always been a part of my youth. I just watched it again, actually like 2 nights ago, and that is the one and only Predator, the original Predator, directed by John McTiernan and starring the iconic Arnold Schwarzenegger. There's so many, growing up, this came out in 1987, and this movie was definitely a product of my childhood. I grew up watching this movie. It still remains my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It still remains probably my favorite John McTiernan film. He is or was he got into some legal trouble a few years ago, and I believe there were a bunch of lawsuits, and I think he actually served some time in jail. But John McTiernan he was a really prolific action director, an American action director in the 80s and the 90s, and he made so many great action movies during that time. I mean, probably the most popular one outside or right behind Predator or right before Predator would be Die Hard with Bruce Willis. And he also made The 13th Warrior, which is a movie, one of his later movies with Antonio Banderas, which is such a killer movie, and I think a really underrated movie, but such a badass movie. And Predator, so many great films to his credit, and he was a really iconic action director during the 80s, basically. I mean, so many great films to his credit. And I think since he got involved with a lot of the legal problems that were going on, and he's gotten older. He hasn't really made any films, but and the other film or other films he's made, The Hunt for Red October with Sean Connery, which is an awesome movie. That's a movie I eventually want to do a show on. I really love that movie. He also directed The Last Action Hero, which is also another Schwarzenegger movie, which is a really fantastic movie. And I feel, as when in regards to Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, a movie that doesn't get the attention that it deserves. Also, like I said, the 13th Warrior killer movie, definitely the most underrated film of John McTiernan's career. The Thomas Crown Affair, which is a remake, which is actually a really great movie. But some really great, iconic, American action movies. Movies, obviously the Predator franchise, the first Predator movie, which came out in '87, was a mega mega hit, and it launched, this massive franchise. There's a whole bunch of Predator movies. It's a pretty mixed bag, I think, as far as the franchise. I'm not a huge fan of the franchise. I think there's a couple of good movies. Predator 2 is okay, and that stars Danny Glover. It's pretty decent, but it's not great. There and there are also some crossover films that included the Alien vs Predator series. There's like one of those that's pretty good that stars Lance Henriksen, who is one of my favorite horror actors, one of my favorite actors. And there's one with him in it that's actually pretty good. But there's at least 5 or 6 movies in the entire franchise, and there's one that just came out last year called Prey, which I haven't seen, and I've heard that one is really really good. There was a movie that, and I do own a few of the films in the franchise, and again, I'm not a really big fan. I think they're kind of they're pretty lackluster films. There was a movie that was produced by Robert Rodriguez, the great Robert Rodriguez, responsible for Planet Terror and Sin City, From Dusk Till Dawn. He produced a newer version starring Adrian Brody, Predators, which isn't a very good movie. I've given that movie a chance. I actually own that on Blu-ray. It's okay. I mean, it starts off okay with kind of an interesting premise of where these prisoners are basically dropped off on this alien planet that's inhabited by the predators. But it gets really cockamamie and silly and kind of stupid, but it's not a very good movie. And I was really surprised that Robert Rodriguez's name was attached to it. He didn't direct it. I think if he directed it, it could have been better, but I don't know. It's not a very good movie. But as a whole, the franchise, I think, is not very good. That one I said that I mentioned, and I think it's called Requiem, and it's an Alien versus Predator spin-off movie, and it stars Lance Henriksen. I remember that one. I do own that one, and that one is actually really good. But there's so many. There's so many films in the Alien or in the Predator franchise. So, but the very first one, again, this was a movie. It's definitely my favorite Schwarzenegger movie. So many great Schwarzenegger movies, obviously. You have Commando, Terminator, which is really a really close second for me. A whole ton of movies. That the list is so huge, but Predator is the one for me. I always go back to it. I have 2 editions. I actually have 3 editions of Predator. I have a real standard DVD copy, which is okay, and then I got a special edition, like a collector's edition of it on DVD a few years ago. And like I've said before in previous videos, I have these particular habits for when it comes to shopping for movies. And when it comes to buying new Blu-ray 4K movies, which is what I try to focus on as far as a fan and as far as being a collector of movies, I always go to Blue Moose and I pretty much try to only seek out grindhouse exploitation movies. Those that style, like I've said many times, is my favorite style of filmmaking, without a doubt. Lately, I've been mixing things up, trying to do other films. I did a show on John Wick. I love all kinds of styles. I love big budget films. I love movies that are shot for, if it's good, it's good. I don't really discriminate about, within that realm. I don't really believe in being like a snob or an elitist. And I know there are folks out there that, certain times when you gravitate towards a particular genre of filmmaking, or definitely within the music genre, there it it there's that thing that can happen of where you start kind of becoming a group, becoming part of a group, and then that has a label of where it's a very particular style, and then that can evolve to where I've noticed that people who are into a very particular style, they start almost adapting this kind of judgmental thing around other, when it comes to other genres, and then there's like an air of elitism that comes around with that, and then the next tier of that, I feel, comes like this, you know this very I don't know, like a snobby hipster kind of thing that comes along with that, where they start judging things, and then because it's cool to like a certain thing, and then it becomes like this herd mentality thing. I don't I don't subscribe to that at all. I think people, when it comes to the term of elitism, I think that it's appropriate, but then it's a fine line, to where you use that. I think a person who has, say, whether it's film or music or from a literary sense, or say in the painting world, if a person develops a taste and gets bitten by a bug, in regards to those mediums, that person will probably spend many many years checking out those respective genres or that particular genre, and from a fan's perspective, you'll start being able to you know differentiate people who are good at that particular style and people who are not so great, different levels within that, and then you'll develop a taste probably around particular artists in that genre or style that you'll naturally gravitate towards. But you'll develop a taste, and you'll be able to understand the language more, and you can come from it from a pretty you'll eventually have this idea of being pretty educated, and being able to sift through things and have a sense where you can differentiate what's good and what's bad. And I know that's subjective, but that just comes with time and experience. Learning a new language, and you start developing a taste, and you start seeing the characteristics of what makes something good and not, and maybe something that is like kind of subpar, or it might be bland in comparison to something that is really good. And I think that just comes with, that's kind of a lifelong experience, or a lifetime experience, and that just goes into you know really taking that time and the education around it. And I think people who do that, they can become a specialist in that field. They can develop really good tastes, and have a real critical way of thinking of things, but for the most part, because they've taken the time to do the research and you know, they've taken that really deep dive into that particular thing, they can, you know, to a degree become an authority in that and know what they're talking about. So I believe that, and then that ushers in the idea of it's an elitist. You can become an elitist, and I think to a degree that's accurate, but that also can have a negative connotation. But I think you can become, you know, very well educated in a particular thing and be able to you know, differentiate certain things from others. And so that's an important thing. But getting back to the idea of groups and labels and the idea of elitism, you know, there are people out there that I have like one or two friends that are into just foreign films. And they, you know, they just pretty much see films in that genre. They but they've also developed this thing of where they're very judgmental, and if another genre comes along, say in films, or they look at another genre without seeing any, without checking those things out, they'll be very judgmental, and they have there's this air of where they kind of become snobs. And I'm not down with that. I feel like I don't want to really be a part of any of those groups. I don't really want to be a part of herd mentality per se. I want to like art because it moves me or it resonates me. I don't want to stick with a particular group or a style. Naturally, right? You know, it's always going to be a thing that there's going to be things you're going to always kind of gravitate towards. That's how I am in regards to films. When it comes to the world of like the horror exploitation world, that's kind of my jam. That's my world. That's the stuff I love the most. But that being said, I love all kinds of movies. So I'm always trying to check out new things, and so I don't care if a movie is necessarily like, you know, the say a film, the cost or the budget of a film was like $50 billion, or if it was $50. You know, I don't see why there's no reason you can't like or love a John Wick movie and then also love a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. I mean, they're as polar opposite as as you know something can possibly be, but they both resonate with me, and they're both entertaining as all hell. So, and I think there's that's sometimes a rare perspective, you know, because it's those two examples stylistically they're so different from each other. But I love it all. So, but anyway, so Predator to me, again, it was it's an integral part of my youth. It was an integral part of my youth. I just watched it again the other night, and so like when I was saying, when I go to Bull Moose, I typically go there and I try to only buy exploitation movies just because they have a really great selection, and those movies are really rare. They could go away, who knows? I don't know what the lifespan is going to be for a lot of these films, and there's all these just amazing additions. So I snatched them up whenever I get a chance. So I typically buy those kinds of films in that, you know, when I'm there. When it comes to movies like this, or in general, but when it comes to say films that are a little bit more commercial or Hollywood-based films, I go to the Goodwill in Rockland quite a bit, and that shop is pretty fantastic. There's obviously Goodwills everywhere. It's a, you know, big franchise, and there's one in Belfast that's pretty decent, and they're all over the place. But there's one in Rockland. The one in Rockland is really good as far as when it comes to movies. and music too. But I have gotten a shit ton of movies from the Goodwill in Rockland, and I just picked this up actually last week, and this is a Blu-ray version of Predator. And I've gotten so many movies from there, and typically they're really really cheap, a buck, $2, and they're perfect condition. Some of them have never been used, but most of them are definitely like the bigger budget kind of Hollywood films. I have a ton of I've pretty much completed my Marvel collection by going there on Blu-ray. So, but I have three editions of Predator. I have one, like I said, I have one that's a real standard, kind of generic DVD copy of it. That's decent. And then I picked up, and I think it was at Goodwill a few years ago. I picked up a collector's edition of on DVD, which is actually really good. It has a really nice presentation. It's remastered, and it's a collector's edition. It has a nice slipcover. There's some really good special features on there. It's two discs. There's a widescreen edition and then a regular formatted version, or a theatrical um, cut version. There there it comes with a bonus disc where there's actually some pretty good special features on there, and it's a good addition. But the other day when I was in Goodwill, I again I've never had it on Blu-ray. I've never seen Predator on Blu-ray, and it's one of my all-time. Like I said, it's my favorite Schwarzenegger movie. It's one of my all-time favorite action movies, and I definitely consider this to be an action sci-fi horror movie, because it's super gory, it's super violent, it's very dark, and obviously it's obviously a horror movie slash sci-fi movie. And I've never seen it on Blu-ray, which is so weird. And I've never owned it on Blu-ray. So they had a copy of this on Blu-ray, and I picked it up just a few days ago. It was only for a few bucks. I think it was like, yeah, $6. The only thing, it doesn't have any special features on here. That's the only thing. And I was a little bit hesitant at first to buy it, because I'm actually really happy with the DVD copy that I have, the special collector's edition, because it does come with a bunch of special features. Like, I'm really happy. I love that version of it that I have. But I wanted to get an upgrade and get it on Blu-ray, so I picked it up. And again, it doesn't have any special features on here, but it's all remastered, and it's awesome. I was really impressed with, especially when it came to the sound and the soundtrack. Visually, it's amazing too. I've never seen it on Blu-ray, and this version is really really good. Again, it's a movie, and I've said this. I've had this experience, and I've talked about this many times, and I've had this experience numerous times when I see a movie, a movie that I grew up watching or that I've seen countless times. When I get a copy of it on Blu-ray, like a good edition of it on Blu-ray, or especially 4K, a lot of the times it's like watching that film for the first time. And this is definitely that kind of experience. Like, I've seen this movie, a million times, and it literally, when I sat down to watch this the other night, it was literally like watching it for the first time. It's awesome. The transfer to this in this digital format on Blu-ray is pretty awesome. I'm really excited, especially when it comes to the film score and the soundtrack. It's really awesome. It's really really well produced. And this is definitely, I think, one of the best, horror, or just in general, one of the best film scores and soundtracks. It's such an iconic film score. I mean, like with the opening theme. I mean, it's just, you just know it's so recognizable. And it was composed by Alvin Silvestri, who is a very well known, who's very well known composer who's done so many movies. I mean, it's unbelievable. Back to the Future, 1985, Forrest Gump, The Polar Express. He did all the Back to the Future films. I mean, those are just awesome. Castaway. I mean, he's made so many great. He's such a great Hollywood composer, and to me, this was always, the greatest. I love this film score. He did Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He also did Captain America, which I didn't realize, which I really love. The first Captain America movie in 2011. Night at the Museum. Ready Player One, which is actually a pretty good movie. It's a later Steven Spielberg movie, which is a movie I'd want to see again. But Alan Silvestri is an iconic film composer in Hollywood. He's like all just these titles alone. I mean, gives you an indication. So good. And the other thing that's so amazing about Predator is the cast. I mean, the cast is so iconic. I mean, you got Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, Carl Weathers, Kevin Peter Hall, Jesse Ventura. I mean, amazing. It's got some of the most quotable lines of all time. Sonny Landham, Apita Carrilla, Shane Black, and the awesome Bill Drake. I'm a huge Bill Drake fan. Such an awesome actor. He was actually in the last movie I saw him in. He was actually in Mandy, which I did a show on, which is easily my favorite Nicolas Cage movie and one of the best movies that's come out. I think one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies that's come out in recent years, and it's one of my all-time favorite movies. But he was in that, and I remember when I first saw Mandy, I was just blown away that he was in this film. He's great in it, and he's only in a small part of the movie, but so great. But this edition, I have to say though, this it's truly like one of those experiences of I've talked about Alien, Ridley Scott's film from 1979, which is one of my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movies. I had that experience with that when I got a collector's edition of it on Blu-ray 4K and I watched it for the first time. For me, it was like literally watching the movie, watching Alien for the very first time, and that was a movie again, like Predator, I had seen a bazillion times, and the transfer of that was just pure magic. And the same goes for this. I'm super excited that I got this, and I had my reservations because it didn't have any special features. I thought maybe this is going to be just a real standard kind of version, maybe a little bit of a better, maybe the mastering would be a little bit better than your standard DVD, but to my big surprise, it's like head and shoulders above, and such an awesome movie. And this is the definitive way to watch this movie. Super excited. So yeah, Predator. What else can be said about this iconic action movie? So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again for your support, and we will see you next time. Peace.